welcome back to LTC Heroes Live. I am joining you from the Missouri Healthcare Association at the Summer Convention Branson 2022. I'm joined today with Sarah Henke. She is the Advocacy Director at the association that invited LTC Heroes. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Sarah, when you hit my calendar, I'm pretty sure Michelle booked you to join me. I was really excited because I remembered that in February when I went to the winter convention, I said, I think that's the Sarah that I thought was one of the best presenters. You are passionate about advocacy, and you did an amazing talk, and I got to go to the Capitol. To get things started, before we get into advocacy and long-term care, can you tell me a little bit how you got into advocacy in general?
Sure. So I honestly, this is full disclosure, my father and my grandfather were also lobbyists, and so this was kind of a family business, if you will, but I tried my best to avoid it, to be honest. I didn't think politics was really something for me, but the more I got into my career post-college, I graduated with a degree in health sciences. I worked for a couple nonprofits doing grant-funded programs, and the good thing about grant-funded programs is that they end, and so you don't have to make that hard commitment that a lot of people have to make coming out of jobs or coming out of college and going into their careers. So one grant program led to another grant position, led to another one, and eventually I ended up working for the Rural Health Clinics Association. And my job there was to go to rural health clinics and tell them how state policy impacts them. Whenever I was doing that, I realized just how involved policy and legislation at the state level really impacts how we deliver care to everyone in Missouri. And so from there, that was kind of the beginning of what I would call my grassroots career. And so we had a lot of people in the legislature due to term limits that were coming in brand new that maybe ran because they were a farmer, they were a teacher, they were passionate in a very siloed policy area. But then they get to the floor and they're voting on huge bills that are impacting healthcare for anyone from children to elderly, like most of our members care for. And I realized that, politics isn't just politics whenever you look in. There's a lot of really nuanced parts that not a lot of people hear about, but matter a ton. So that's whenever I was hired by Nikki at MHCA to kind of put together more of a grassroots approach and start having all of our wonderful people who are working in long-term care talk to their legislators and get them comfortable with talking to their legislators and understanding that you are the experts in this field. Most of these legislators have never, because of their age, they are so young, they don't even have parents who need to be in long-term care or have never stepped foot into a long-term care facility, and so they need to give their perspective in what they're doing every day for their constituents in their district and make sure that these legislators know the impacts that they're having as they're voting on legislation that pertains to long-term care.
I want to know a little bit about the learning curve. When you became a lobbyist in long-term care, how long did it take for you to, one, truly understand what we're talking about at this industry, and how long did it take for you to kind of fake it as well?
Right. So I'm still learning. The good thing was I had two things working, one for me, one against me. So one, the legislators, we just had a whole new swath of legislators come in, and so they understood even about the same level that I understood. So as I was talking to them about issues, I could kind of work my way through it because we would kind of talk about it together. The thing that I had also going for me but kind of against me was that I stepped into the room with everyone who had been doing this or had been talking about long-term care for at least 20 years. And so I'm not going to lie, my Google search probably now, looking back on that first meeting that I went to, my Google search was probably extremely comical because I was Googling things like what is a tort and what is a SNF and what's the difference between a skilled nursing facility and a nursing home. They're the same thing. And so it was just one of those things. I sat down in my first meeting, I took a ton of notes, and I walked up to Nikki and I was like, I have a few questions for you. So that definitely happened for, I would say, the first 2.5 years of meetings. I really dove into the side of reimbursement. And so understanding the budget in Missouri is extremely complicated, let alone the reimbursement policy for skilled nursing facilities and any kind of long-term care. And so I really dove into that, understood that very well, but I'm still learning a ton every single year because, as we figured out in 2020, nothing's predictable. And there are many years that we see something that we could have never anticipated we saw before. No matter what happens, there's some sort of policy that has a piece in it, whether it's policy that was set and then they couldn't foresee what was going to happen in the future, so we have to fix that so that it's amenable to what we need to do now for our residents, or something that's just completely new, and as we're addressing it, we're kind of flying a plane, or we're kind of building a plane while flying it. And so I would say it took a good 4 years for me to feel extremely confident in talking about some of this stuff, but I'm still learning a ton.
I feel so relieved that you Googled embarrassing acronyms that today we take for granted.
Yes.
I remember my first month or two when I worked for Experience Care and LTC Heroes, I kept referring to directors of nursing as Dons, and someone sent me a direct message to say, Peter, don't call him a Don, it's D-O-N. I'm like, why can't I call him a Don? It's faster. No, you can't call him a Don.
Yep.
So where I'd like to go back to the first time I met you. You were such a competent presenter on the things that we needed to take to the Capitol. This was February 28th of 2022, and you were talking about reimbursement and staffing. Can you tell me, what's been the big focus for you all this year at Missouri Healthcare Association? What you all have, what you've done in terms of progress, and also what you're continuing to fight for?
Yeah, so those two issues are definitely our largest issues that we are seeing in the long-term care industry. I'll start with reimbursement, and then the reimbursement kind of leads into the staffing issue. So what a lot of people don't understand is in our skilled nursing facilities across the state, anywhere from 70 to 75% of the people we're caring for are on Medicaid. And so Medicaid, I know everyone kind of relates that to the Medicaid expansion that happened a couple years ago via ballot issue. That is not the Medicaid we're talking about. This is a Medicaid program that was I think created in like 1991, and they said, okay, we know that people are just outliving their resources, but when they don't have any more resources, we can't just leave people out on the streets. They do deserve the care, and as you're getting older, you become more expensive, to be quite frank, to care for because of all of the acute care you require for any kind of maintenance of diseases that you have accumulated throughout your lifetime, however you have chosen to live your life. And so Medicaid is for those who we're in the category of what they like to call age, blind, or disabled. So whenever you look at the Medicaid reimbursement, if you kind of picture a pie, the state does contribute a decent chunk of it. Our budget line item, if you look at it, is pretty large, but if you look at the total cost of care for residents, the state only contributes about 15 to 20% of what it truly costs to take care of a resident. So let's say you have 10 residents in your facility, and you know that these residents, in order to be in a facility, you have to need 24/7 care. You can't just walk into a nursing facility one day and say, hey, you know what, I'm really tired of living at home. Can I just park here for a little bit? That's not how it works. You have to be sick enough. You have to score and qualify to receive that care in a nursing home. And then whenever you don't have the resources to pay for that care anymore, then that's when you transfer to Medicaid. So when you're in that home, you require that 24/7 care. You usually have a pretty complex set of or cocktail of medications at that point, and you're pretty immobile, so you need help getting around. That requires a lot of staff, and there are staffing minimums that we have to adhere to, but in order to ensure the quality care that we like to deliver to our residents, we want to make sure that we have dietitians and many people on staff, certain kinds of therapy, to make sure that the residents are living their best life. So usually, I will say about with everything that is required, because we're doing a lot of things to ensure quality of life, but there's also a lot of things that are required of us. We are the most heavily regulated industry, both from a state perspective and from a federal perspective. So the state comes in and they say, all right, according to your costs, because at the end of the year, the facility submits their costs and they say, you know, to care for these 10 residents. Oh, raffle card time. So they say, okay, your 10 residents cost about $185 a day to care for. And so we submit all of our costs. We are extremely heavily audited. We make sure that we have not only are performing at the levels that we need to perform and following all the regulations we need to, but that we are also administering a good amount of care, and all the while making sure that we are fitting into those parameters of approved costs. So look at all of our costs. They say, here's about what it costs for you to take care of that resident. in our minds, and what we are hoping for eventually is that costs 180-ish, 185, 190, depending on the resident, dollars a day. That should automatically translate to what we are being reimbursed for Medicaid. We're not trying to make a profit. We are just trying to break even and be paid for the care that we're providing. Unfortunately, most of the facilities for their Medicaid residents are being reimbursed at about $165-ish a day, $170 a day. Those numbers are going to ebb and flow with how much of our Medicaid population is in our facility. We did just get a good chunk of funding to rebase, what is called rebasing our rate. So those numbers are going to fluctuate a little bit, but either way, we are extremely underfunded because at $20 a day really adds up. And that's for one resident. If you spread that over all of the residents in your facility that are on Medicaid, which in the urban areas is a little bit less, but in the rural areas, you're going to see about 90 to 95% of your occupancy of your residents in your facility being on Medicaid. So so looking at the cost reports and getting the state to contribute the amount that they need to in order for, because it all, it is very confusing, but it all depends on what the state contributes that sets the rate. The state, even though it contributes about 15% of what it costs to take care of the residents, that state percentage triggers how much the federal government is going to send down to help us pay. So this federal government basically says, oh, good job, state, you paid $1 to take care of this person. We're going to match you with $1.60. So the federal government, between all of the different ways that we receive a match from their money, is actually paying for about 60%, give or take, of what it costs to give the residents. But it's all set. All that reimbursement is based on what the state contributes. So, long story longer, this year we got a huge pot of money from the state, $200 million, which was wonderful. But that got us to what our true costs were in 2019. 2019 was before COVID hit. When COVID hit, we had extreme staffing issues, which we'll get to in a minute. We also had extreme increased costs with testing, giving out PPE for our residents and for our staff, ensuring that there were a lot of new protocols that encouraged social distancing. It was an extremely difficult time for our residents and for our staff mentally, on their health, but it was also extremely hard financially. So if the state just gave us $200 million just to bring us up from how far back they were, just to bring us up to where we were in 2019, we still have a long ways to go to make sure that we are getting reimbursed at the level we need to with our costs, how they look today. So that's reimbursement. I know that was a lot, so if there's anything you think I should clarify, I'm happy to do so.
Where I would like to pause, and I asked you this before we went live, which is how do things line up politically speaking? Where are Republicans and Democrats? Where's the landscape in policy inside of Missouri along the reimbursement?
Yeah, so whenever you hear about campaign trails, which you are right now because it's a big election year in Missouri, when you hear about the campaign trails, you hear about the extremely partisan issues and what positions they take on that. Our area is extremely gray. It's very difficult for people to form a somewhat partisan opinion on our funding, because you do think of public funding, social welfare. Typically, that kind of leans to a more Democratic side, but Republicans understand at the same time, and some of our best champions in the House and Senate are certainly Republicans who understand that this is an extremely vulnerable population. They have no place else to go. Our facilities are doing their best to take care of them, and they want to help us and make sure that we are adequately reimbursed. And so that kind of follows the budget path throughout the legislative process, which is a little different than the traditional piece of policy. So the dynamics are interesting. It's more about, honestly, awareness and education and making sure we are spending extreme amounts of time going through what that formula is to get to a certain reimbursement rate with legislators, making them understand why we need this money, making them understand and taking them to facilities and understanding what it is like to administer and be a part of long-term care in their districts. And so they're going to these facilities that have their constituents working there, have their constituents living there, and all in all just realizing what large of an ecosystem long-term care truly is, because it's just not talked about that much.
Sarah, before we move on to staffing and also agency and why we went to the Capitol in February, I want to take a brief pause and thank our sponsors. Okay, confession time. Yes, I host the LTC Heroes podcast. Hopefully you know that by now, but I can't take all the credit. I have to thank Jason Long, the CEO of Experience Care. He told me to start this platform 2 years ago, and without their support, we wouldn't be here today. Go over to visit experience.care to see the best EHR in the market. Also, a special thank you to Missouri Healthcare Association for inviting LTC Heroes to this special convention. If you like the show, go over to ltcheroes.com and subscribe today. Thank you. As I said, thank you to Missouri Healthcare Association for introducing us. Sarah, tell me about what you all have been doing in the last 9 months in staffing and agency in the state.
Yeah, so whenever 2020 hit and COVID really started running through, our facilities were certainly hit hardest and hit first. It was not a fun place to work. It was extremely difficult. The folks that you see here are extremely dedicated staff who have made it through the pandemic with us, and we are so thankful. I did want to say that first, is that there's a lot of really dedicated staff, but there was also a lot of staff who couldn't risk it to their health, risk it to their families. There's a lot of places that chose to go virtual with jobs. The gig economy really kicked up. And quite honestly, we couldn't pay that much more, because whenever you're set on a fixed income, which is what, no matter what care we administer to this resident this day, we still get $100 and whatever back to pay for them. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for giving bonuses or special pay for our workers in order to keep them here. They can work at McDonald's down the street and get paid more than what we're able to pay them because of our fixed Medicaid reimbursement rate. So that led to a lot of people leaving, and I get it. It's an extremely difficult job. I can't even begin to imagine. Like I said, I'm with the advocacy team. I don't actually work in a long-term care facility, so I was more on the outside looking in at this issue. So what happened is staffing agencies began to pop up everywhere, and they saw that, if you are a facility and you have X number of residents, that requires you to have X number of staff, or else you are getting fined in the tens of thousands of dollars if you are short-staffed. And I completely understand that policy. We do have to have adequate number of staff in our facilities for our residents. But the staffing agencies, it was a smart business move, I will give that to them, but they put themselves as the middleman in between the mandated commodity, which is the staff, and the people who needed it, which was our facilities and our residents. Staffing agencies, in short, and I know there are some good players out there, but the bad players is who we were working against. Staffing agency would go into the facility and say, I know they're paying you $13, $14 an hour. I can pay you $20 an hour. They pull our staff out whenever there's a shortage. We have to use these staffing agencies. We don't have another option. We don't have the money for marketing. We barely have money to get an adequate HR department, right? And so we don't have money for marketing, for recruitment, for any of these kinds of extracurricular activities that would get you more staff. And convincing someone to leave a pretty easy job and come work a very difficult job for less money is nearly impossible to do. And so the staffing agency recruits the staff out, say, I'll pay you $25, and then all of a sudden we're short. We have to call the staffing agency. They're like, you need me more than I need you. There's a lot of facilities in this area who I could send this staff to. You're going to pay me $25 an hour at least, sometimes $30, sometimes more, in order for me to send this staff member in there. So we didn't have a choice. It was either pay that extra money for that shift or get fined tens of thousands of dollars for being short-staffed. Not only the fines, but not delivering the level of care that we need to. Whenever you have staff coming in to your facilities, think of the population that we're caring for. We're caring for those with dementia, Alzheimer's, a lot of memory issues, and something that they really benefit from is consistency. And so having new people pop in and constantly meeting new faces, that was pretty difficult for a lot of the residents. And so making sure that we had consistent staff was extremely important for a lot of the population that we were caring for. Staffing agencies, we proposed legislation. The first legislation started with a cap. It said look at what we are paying our staff, which is reported and is audited as part of that cost report. Look at what we are paying our staff on average. You can't exceed 300% of that, because a lot of times it was going into the 500-600% of what we were able to pay our staff is what they were charging us. That was a difficult policy to overcome, especially in a Republican majority, and it wasn't necessarily business friendly, and so that was something that we compromised on. But what we were able to accomplish is that staffing agencies now have to register in the state. So if there is a complaint against a staff for a staffing agency, there is a mechanism to do so, and if their license is pulled in the state, then they cannot operate in the state. So having that kind of oversight of staffing agencies, I think, will be really helpful, because there were a lot of people, some of the staffing agency staff has been wonderful, and they were real lifesavers on the days that a lot of our facilities needed them. And our industry cannot work without staffing agencies. But the staffing agencies who are not vetting their individuals, who are sending uncompliant people into our facilities, because remember, if you work in our facility, you have to be fully vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, you have to have your criminal background check. The staffing agencies who were not vetting their people and sending them into our facilities, and then those people were either violent against our residents, not following protocols, so we got fined anyways, or any of those things, we had nothing we could do about it. So now there is a complaint mechanism. If that staffing agency continues to send people like that into our facilities, then there is a way to get those bad players out of our state, which is what we have really been advocating for. Do I think the legislation went far enough? No, I would love to see a cap in there, honestly. But you have to think about the downstream effects. Ultimately, that cap gets to the nurses' wages, and that's nothing I ever want to do. Nurses work extremely hard. They're the reason that our industry is the way it is. They're the reason that residents receive the care they receive, and so that's nothing I would ever be able to truly advocate for and think about that downstream effect. But I wish there was a way to at least limit that spread between what the staffing agency is paying our staff and what they're charging the home. That would be kind of my ideal situation.
Sarah, I love that you've been able to break down two complex topics that I've been, I think this is my 10th convention in the last 9 months, and you've been able to break down complex issues that maybe, a CNA who's listening to this, or an MDS coordinator who's listening to this, is able to understand at the policy level that these aren't easy wins, so I appreciate that. As we start to wrap up, I know that your work cannot be done without the support of amazing members and also some politicians who helped you get this done. Mm-hmm. When I met you in February, you gave us a very simple list. These are the politicians who are supporting us. Here are the members that you can reach out to. They're real informed. Follow them around, and they'll do it. Who are some shout-outs that you would like to give to either inside of the association or in the Capitol today in Missouri?
Yeah, so the things that I know and the way that I know how to advocate today is because of Nikki Strong. Nikki Strong is the executive director of MHCA. And actually, whenever she was promoted to the executive director, I kind of started filling in for her as the advocacy director. She served as their lobbyist for many, many years before I did. And she has taught me so much about the industry. Honestly, about the industry, about lobbying in general, being sure, the way that I was able to boil down those topics, she was the one who kind of taught me, here's how you need to boil it down. You need to remember these people don't understand anything, so I can have in the back of my mind, okay, this is how I really need to talk about this issue in order for them to not just get the glossy eyes and then stop paying attention to me, which is what I don't want to happen, right? And then someone who will be dearly, dearly missed in the legislature, and while I understand some of the good things of term limits, Senator Dan Hageman from Northwest area of the state. He was a staunch advocate for us. He was a wonderful appropriations chair, served extremely diligently, and his staff really helped him out and helped us out. He understood our issue. He consistently talked to our members. Kim Ireland, who is a member, had a fantastic relationship with him. She actually has a fantastic relationship with the senator coming in as well, and so we're really good with that seat overturning. But I wanted to make sure I gave a shout out to him because he has been truly helpful, and even whenever I was a young lobbyist and didn't really understand anything, he helped me understand the budget process and kind of helped me get to where I was today. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say anything. And then our board members, honestly, I can call any of them and say, I know this is a dumb question, but I need your advice on this, or how can I talk about this, or give me a real instance in how I can portray, this issue to how this policy affects it. I need some examples. And our board members and honestly, any of the administrators in our association, SNAP to, they give me the information I need. My advocacy would not be possible without them.
Sarah, thank you so much for explaining this, joining LTC Heroes, inviting us back to your convention twice this year. I look forward to talking to you next year. Having someone who's so competent at the policy level is not only helpful for those of us who are in Missouri, but the rest of the people in the rest of the country who listen to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Want to connect with leaders in long-term care? Go to www.ltcheroes.com to join our community on Facebook and LinkedIn. Get exclusive access to marketing tips, SOPs, and insights from prominent voices in the industry. Only at ltcheroes.com.